I'm Allison Zmuda, and I am here with one of my besties, Heidi Hayes Jacobs. And we're working in Vista, California for the past couple days on a fabulous project. But one of the things that I wanted to have a conversation with Heidi about is the power of the work that she's done for a couple of decades around interdisciplinary curriculum. And that's becoming more and more powerful these days. So I'd love to start engaging you in a conversation around what are the timeless aspects that you see around an interdisciplinary curriculum, and where is it evolving?
It's such an interesting question. It is a design choice, of course. It deals with basic epistemology. What is it we want kids to know, and how do we organize knowledge? And when I wrote my very first book, it was with ASCD on interdisciplinary design and implementation, and I'd done quite a number of years of research, even in my dissertation at Columbia. And what I learned is that there had been a long-term tension between an either-or, whether we should be discipline-based versus interdisciplinary, and there was tension about that. And I actually traced it back in Western thought to Aristotle and Plato. In Aristotelian thinking, there were really three disciplines he talked about. And Aristotle was different than Plato, who believed in the unification of all. And so you start to see this interesting tension. And what I didn't quite understand is why it was so either or. And it became politicized in this country. At the turn of the century, we became very discipline-based after the Committee of 10 and 15 met and organized the day in a divisive way. And then you have John Dewey. You start to see people who come up thinking more about interdisciplinarity again. So it's gone back and forth. And so for me, what I felt was necessary was begin to look at a kind of continuum of options, that there were design options. And one could, in fact, choose to work in a discipline if one were true to the spirit of it, to really use the approaches and thinking and lens of the scientist. And one could look at history as an historian. But there were also opportunities to find connections. And so I started to think of that differently and began to think of the possibility of parallel disciplines, that we could run things concurrently and help kids see connections. We could start to work at modest, more multidisciplinary between 2 or 3. It could be something like humanities or STEM, that kind of thing. And then full interdisciplinary, where we deliberately look at all of the disciplines. And then I think it has evolved now.
Well, and when I'm thinking about what you're saying, and it's so powerful to start to see new ways of framing things. So you mentioned STEM, and we can also argue that STEAM is something that's incredibly powerful. When we're thinking about challenge-based learning, phenomenon-based learning.
That's right.
So you're starting to see that starting to be the through line again.
Yes. It is. What's evolved, and I mean, that's exactly right. I think what's evolved is when I had that continuum, I had one other thing at the end, which was it isn't about disciplines. It was the sort of notion of an integrated day.
Right.
And it had to do with place-based or setting-based. Now what's emerging is very much a look at phenomena, a look at world or global issues or problems, and instead of making it what can the English teacher do about a world-based problem, or what does the science teacher teach, though I think that's still pretty rock solid in the majority of our schedules and the way people are certified. The bottom line is to begin to look at the reality that there is no real situation, there is no problem, there is no issue that you can examine in the real world that isn't inherently dealing with all those disciplines. So what's happening is less emphasis on what my job is or my time of day, but more what are probing questions to break out to some extent of the confines of the disciplines. I think it's actually shaking up some real important views in a good way of the rigidity of the way we still organize the day.
Absolutely. And that's what I was thinking about, is that the notion of not just potentially not carving up time that way, but starting to think about flexible use of time, flexible use of space.
That's right.
And also the opportunity where students continue to feel like they have more connection and ownership of the inquiry or the problem or the investigation or the idea.
I think that ties in very much to the work you and Ben have been doing with Student at the Center, and that the emergent place isn't so much the subjects and times of day, but what we find compelling problems. The thing you don't want to lose, though, because there is some value, that I think it would be remiss for me not to say this, because there is something about the word discipline that's very important.
Yes.
Discipline actually means love, and it has to do with the notion of going in depth and learning certain skill sets that are particularly important. What I think has happened is this rigidity to time. You know, I'm remembering, I think the first line when you write a book, the first line in a book is a really important one. The first line in my interdisciplinary book was really wonderful, and it came from a real moment. I think it says something like this: I'm with a second grader named Mike.
Yep.
And I said, Mike, what is math? And he says, it's something you do in the morning.
Yeah, which is lovely.
And he is lovely, but it isn't, because
Yeah.
when he came into kindergarten, it wasn't that way.
That's right.
And so, in a sense, it's how do we? It's sort of the interesting struggle right now, which is fun, I think, is to figure out how do we maintain and keep the depth that we get by investigating through what we've learned through the lens of science and what we've learned through history and so forth, and at the same time deal with it phenomenologically. What I think is happening, though, we have talked about this before, is I actually think within disciplines that's already breaking out. If I look at the next gen science standards, I look at those and I go, my gosh, there's a lot of geography in there.
That's right.
There's a lot of, what's happening, or if the physics has so much, it is mathematics. What's happening is I think there is a shift, and we're in the middle of it, and it's a very exciting time to plan.
Well, and the other aspect that I'm thinking about is the book that you wrote, and I think it was 1989.
Yes,
that first book. So one of the things that I'm more than happy to share with the Learning Personalized community is a couple of cold phrases and statements from that book, including the notion of a continuum of ways to engage or options for interdisciplinary curriculum. But I want to end with, what are one or two moves that you could suggest that a teacher or an administrator could make in order to start bringing disciplines back together again, even if it's only for a first step?
That's a great question. I think actually I might merge it a little bit with your own work. I think one of the things I've learned over the years is it's to help kids see that the disciplines at their best are a way of seeing, that you can see more. And to begin to engage kids by, I used to do an old exercise where we'd hold up a set of keys, and I could be with a group of fourth graders or high school seniors for that matter, and say, what might a scientist ask about these keys? What is it that they see? What are the questions that emerge? And then shift in something like, what might an historian ask about these keys? Or what might the artist or the mathematicians? And what they start to get is there's terminology and language, and you begin to see the richness of that investigation. So one step is to begin to engage students in seeing the value of how we look. But I would say, conversely, to begin to look at interesting questions and discrepancies or perplexing problems or juicy, interesting issues to dive into and look at what are the questions we might ask and be less worried about trying to make sure we teach every standard or we do everything in the content areas. I think part of it is very much the intimacy and the relationship between teacher and student, beginning that work. And then also I think principals can provide time for teachers to take liberty with their curriculum to make it more compositional. You know how I feel that I think curriculum should be taught as creative writing and composition work. So take what you're teaching anyway and begin to look at how you can deliberately make some adjustments and to at least try to do it with one type of unit in the course of a year.
So that's fabulous. And again, it's a privilege and a pleasure to always spend time with Heidi. Hopefully you enjoyed the interview, and let me know what other questions you want to ask Heidi. We are going to be together again in October in Costa Rica for the Tri-Association Conference. So like I said, we can chat again and broadcast it to you.
Thank you, Allison.
Thank you. Later.